Oh, right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are so pleased to have you join us for today's webinar focused on the Parenting Students Project at Austin Community College. And we'll wait for just a moment as folks continue to get logged in here, and then we'll get started. My name is Allyson Cornett, and I serve as the Director of Research here at Trellis Strategies. And I'm so excited about today's webinar because this is a really great opportunity to explore how Austin Community College and United Way for Greater Austin have teamed up to support parenting students. We'll be highlighting efforts to improve retention, different types of basic needs security, and also mental well-being for student parents. And by sharing success stories and lessons learned from the Parenting Students Project or the PSP, we hope to spark ideas and inspire similar partnerships at other colleges, campuses, and organizations. Before we dive in today, just a few housekeeping notes. One, today's webinar is being recorded. All attendees and registrants will receive a copy of the recording and the presentation slides after the event. We'll also hold time for questions at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A feature or the chat box at any time. With that, let's get started with introductions for our panelists, and I'll hand things over to Dr. May Helena Plumb to kick us off. May?
Yeah, thank you, Allyson. So my name is May Plumb. I'm a research associate at Trellis Strategies, and I led the qualitative component of the evaluation of the Parenting Students Project that we did about a year ago. So I'm very excited to be able to share those details with you today. And shall I pass it to Angelica?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Angelica Cancino de Sandoval. I'm the Director of Basic Needs and Advocacy at Austin Community College, and I was the director over the ACC part of this program.
And I'm Becca Bice. I'm the Senior Director of Economic Advancement at United Way for Greater Austin. I worked with parenting students and ACC to help design the model of this program, and United Way facilitated meetings with parenting students throughout this program, as well as worked with Trellis on the evaluation. And it's great to be here.
All right, we can dive straight in with the introduction to the program from you both.
Thanks. And that's going to be me. So we're really lucky to be able to run this program over a series of 4 years. And it was such a wonderful opportunity to continue to learn how to support parenting students. We did start just with the basic understanding that parenting students are twice as likely to drop out of higher education programs than other students. And so we started with just that problem in mind. We worked closely with parenting students through our community work to then design a program and an intervention that we were able to run over a series of 4 years to really learn how to improve supports for parenting students for the outcomes that they wanted to see in terms of graduation, grades, and well-being for themselves and their children and their family. So we decided to target a specific population of students, which are parents. They were 18 to 29 years old, parents of children who were 0 to 12. They did classify as low income, which was around 250% of the federal poverty level, and they were enrolled in 9 credit hours at Austin Community College. I just want to note that there were some requirements for students to stay in this program. They were asked to attend some monthly peer meetings. They were asked to pass at least 9 credit hours a semester, and they were asked to meet with their student advocate, who you will learn more about from Angelica later. But even though we did have requirements to stay in the program, students who did not meet the requirements that semester did have eligibility to appeal. So I just wanted to let you know that was something that we built out through learning the program. And May, if you'll go to the next slide, I will share what the actual program design looks like. So the really one of the cornerstones of this program is that it's a form of guaranteed income program. So we delivered $500 monthly stipends directly to parents into bank accounts at the beginning of the month, every month that they were enrolled in the program. In addition to the monthly financial support, we provided wraparound supports in case management that was largely done through the ACC staff. So Angelica is going to spend a little bit of time talking about what that intensive wraparound support in case management looked like. And then another piece that we found to be really critical was peer connections. Parenting students make up a large population of especially community colleges, but they don't often know each other. And so we met monthly with all of the parenting students who are enrolled in our program. Usually was a Saturday morning virtual meeting, and we had presentations around topics that they highlighted of interest to them, but we also made sure that they had plenty of time for connection. We also built out opportunities for them to have spaces to chat so that they would have this like peer group and peer network of folks who were going through what they were going through at the same time. So these were the three kind of core program design pieces, and I will turn it over to Angelica to talk more about what those wraparound supports look like.
Hi. So with Austin Community College, we each student was assigned an advocate. So an advocate is typically like a social services case manager of sort. Their work was largely around supporting the student in their personal and academic barriers, issues, anything that came up, to know when things were happening with the student. They were largely also the advisor, so they knew exactly what classes the student was in, what classes the student needed to be in. We worked with Becca and her team on identifying students that met the eligibility requirements early on, and then onboarding them and then supporting them throughout each semester. We also, most of the students, if they needed it, were also provided a childcare scholarship, which means that we were paying for their childcare provider of choice, so they can choose any childcare provider in the community, and we paid that childcare provider directly. Many of them also received textbook scholarships, again, if that was something they needed. Some of the programs are largely online or open textbooks, so they didn't need the textbook scholarship. But some of our students were within that health sciences where there was a lot of textbook costs, so many of those received the textbook scholarship as well. And then as the advocates are also the kind of the holder of our student emergency fund. So they are they are the person that controls whether a student can access a student emergency fund, any student. And so all of these parenting students who were involved in this program had direct access to somebody that can help them and work with them through that student emergency fund process.
Okay, and Angelica and Becca, you can just let me know that I've got it right, that was the end of your introductory slides. So I will jump into talking about the evaluation that Trellis Strategies did towards the end of the run of the Parenting Students Project in the summer and fall of last year. So this was a mixed methods evaluation, included three main components. One was a set of 8 semi-structured interviews with participants. These interviews took place in June 2024, and so they were with students who had participated in the Parenting Students Project in that previous spring semester. And the interviews were designed to understand their general college experience, their interaction with support resources, and gauge their reactions to various components of the Parenting Students Project. We also, as part of that process, conducted a small scheduling survey that helped gauge responses from a slightly larger group to a variety of the different PSP resources. And then finally, in the quantitative component, we analyzed over 7,600 student records of parenting students to understand the impact of the Parenting Students Project on academic intensity, GPA, retention, and completion. So this was looking at all student parents at ACC from fall of 2021 to spring of 2024, and looking at that kind of broad cohort with a comparison group of just the PSP students who participated in the PSP at any point during that time, which was a group of 91 students. And while I'm going to take, about 15 minutes today to go over the results of our evaluation, I do want to call it that we wrote a full report on this that includes a lot more details that I encourage you to take a look at. I'll also note that I'm getting over a cold, so I apologize if my voice is a little bit crackly today. So I want to go over 4 key impact areas that we noticed through the different components of the evaluation. And I'll start with the impact of the Parenting Students Project on academic progress. So the real headliner impact that we saw was the fact that PSP participation was associated with 95% retention into the following long semester. So this is a 20 percentage point increase in term-to-term retention compared to student parents who didn't participate in the PSP in a given term. And I'll note that this effect was statistically significant, independent of other factors that we know impact retention, things like race, gender, and age, also independent of whether or not the student received a child care scholarship that term. And furthermore, this improvement in term-to-term retention persists regardless of whether the student participated in the PSP the following semester. So even just that one term participating in the PSP had a marked impact on retention into the following term, regardless of whether they were continuing or moving out of the program. And I'll also note that 88% of students who had ever participated in the PSP had either graduated or were still enrolled at the time of the analysis. And that's in comparison to 54% of all parenting students within the analysis. And so you can see on the bottom, in this chart, that top line is parenting students who had never participated in the PSP. The bottom line is those who had participated in the PSP at least one term during their time. And the big difference is in this still enrolled group in gold, between 35% for non-participants and 65% for participants. And we got some kind of specific feedback on this concept from the interviews, with the really big component in the qualitative interviews being these meetings with student advocates. So interview participants had very praiseful words a lot of the time for their student advocates, calling them encouraging and non-judgmental. And they emphasized that kind of resource connection to these advocates was an important part of the Parenting Students program for them, with one student saying, I feel like if it weren't for the program, I wouldn't meet as much with the student advocate. I would choose my own classes, go my own route. And instead, I've met with my advocate, and I feel like she's pushed me more. And this gets to that role of having an active advisor that's helping maintain that momentum towards graduation, being an encouraging force, rather than these students feeling kind of like alone in their studies. You also heard that there was a credit hour requirement to participation and continuation in the Parenting Students Project. And we did see that the PSP had a positive impact on academic momentum. So PSP participants had a 64% chance of completing 9 credit hours or more in a given semester, compared to just 36% of parents who weren't participating in a given term. And we saw some students talking about the positive impacts of that. For example, the student on the right talked about how, if not for the program, they might have taken just 2 classes or maybe just 1. And she said, I think it's a good part that pushes us to take more classes. That way we graduate faster. Students really acknowledge the impact of that increased enrollment intensity to their overall academic momentum. But they also acknowledge some of the challenges that come with increased enrollment. For example, for this student, talking about having less time with their child while taking 3 classes and feeling maybe a little bit of guilt of, am I balancing my time right, spending time with my family versus in school, acknowledging some of those challenges that come along with increased enrollment intensity, even though there are benefits. Next, I want to go over some of the impacts on financial wellness, really honing in on that $500 a month benefit that we heard about. We saw in the quantitative analysis some kind of clear indicators that it improved their overall financial stability. Students who participated at least one term in the PSP took out on average over $1,000 less in student loans per semester, compared to students who never participate in the PSP. And I want to emphasize here that this is like looking over their whole experience here for students who had participated at any time, not just in the term that they were actively receiving funds, but it had an impact on their overall journey. And additionally, students participating in the PSP during a given semester ended up accessing less in HERF funds, needing less of those emergency funds throughout that term. So that's an indicator both that they are having a little bit more financial resiliency, therefore aren't needing to access emergency funds. And it's also indicating that these funds from the PSP are effectively decreasing the burden on institutional funds. And when speaking to students in interviews, what we heard a lot about was how the stipend had allowed them to increase their work flexibility. This manifested in three core ways. The first is, of course, students were able to work less. They were able to decrease their work hours because they were receiving these additional funds, and therefore they were able to increase the time available for academic and family responsibilities, really addressing that core problem of time poverty that is a struggle for so many student parents. But I also want to point out that sometimes they were able to work smarter. I really enjoyed a conversation I had with one mother who talked about how the financial stability of that monthly stipend gave her the agency to leave a job that was fairly low paying but very consistent, and instead choose a job that was less consistent in how frequently she was paid, but was better, more accommodating, higher paying, and able to kind of work better with her overall schedule. So that the kind of evenness of the stipend was a big impact there. And additionally, some students were able to work at learning rather than working for pay. In particular, one participant talked about a moment that she had had to suddenly stop working for pay due to a family crisis. And during this time, the monthly PSP payment helped her feel like she was still contributing to her household and provided not only that financial support, but kind of the psychological support that she needed to prioritize her education, or even during a time that was pretty hard for her family, and to focus on that long-term goal that she knew would get her further in her career. And finally here, I'm going to go over family life and mental health and belonging together. They're very intertwined issues. A big impact that we saw was the fact that access to childcare is crucial for parents, parenting student success. In the quantitative analysis, looked both at PSP participation and access to the childcare scholarship as separate variables. And found that receiving a childcare scholarship from ACC was associated with increased term-to-term retention and cumulative GPA, completely independent of participation in the PSP, emphasizing that this resource was incredibly helpful for students, and that the resource connection provided by the PSP program helped students make good use of that. And this quote on the right-hand side of the screen here speaks to that story for one interview participant who talked about how the after-school care that she was able to access through this scholarship allowed her to access tutoring after hours. So if she had a class that ended at 4:20 and tutoring would keep her on campus until 6 or 7 at night, that gap coverage between the school day and the evening was able to allow her greater academic success because of accessing those tutoring hours. And I will note, interview participants had a wide variety of experiences with childcare and a wide variety of needs for childcare. And one of the things that interview participants talked about was the need for really flexible childcare options. Some people wanted on campus, some people were hoping for some sort of family-based care that we know is really hard to find support for. Students needed some flexibility in how they were able to use those funds. Interview participants also talked a lot about the benefits of community and peer connection. that you heard Becca talking about. So, for example, they talked about how the monthly peer meetings they had attended helped give them this sense of confidence and belonging just from being around and seeing other student parents. With one interview participant saying, just knowing that there's other student parents out there makes me feel better, because if they're doing it, I can continue to do this, right? Speaking to that a way that just a sense of community and a sense of a role model helps push people to continue their academic progress. They also talked about how the group chats that got set up around these peer meetings were venues where students shared parenting tips or child-friendly activities that were happening about town, or talked about their time management practices and how they were balancing being a parent and being a student. Really emphasizing the way that kind of sharing these resources helped students kind of find new strategies for managing difficult times, and as well as building this greater sense of community in these kind of informal ways outside of the formal process of the Parenting Students Project. Another outcome that was quite interesting to me was the number of students we talked to who were planning to transfer to a four-year institution after finishing their degree at ACC. And a lot of them expressed this feeling of empowerment about seeking out resources at their future institution. They were thinking about this potential resource cliff that students sometimes face as they move from a 2-year to a 4-year. And they felt like by participating in the PSP, they had a better sense of what support they needed as parents and a better sense of how to get that support, of a better kind of sense of confidence about reaching out to find those resources. And last but certainly not least, students talked a lot about how the alleviated time poverty from working less, from having the child care scholarship, allowed them to spend better quality time with their children at various points. And I want to highlight this because we know that one of the big motivators for student parents as they work through their degree is making a better life, not just for themselves, but for their children. And that can be a real bolster to their mental health while they're in school. And so the time to really be with their children and also to kind of feel like their children are getting this positive view into their academic journey was really important for these students as a part of their overall motivation towards school. And so just to close out, I want to highlight 3 key quotes that speak to the kind of nature of institutional support that we heard about at ACC. This quote on the far left, a student saying, "I cannot express how grateful I am that something like this was in my life. It's life-changing. Just offering students $500 a month can change their entire life." So this is really focused on the impact of that financial support for this student. Another student said, "I think out of the entire US, I'd be very impressed if there was another university that cared as much as ACC." And I think, we all on this call know that lots of community colleges really deeply care about these students. But I think what this quote really speaks to me is the way that being in the Parenting Students Project helped this student feel seen by the institution, helped that care that we all feel really come through and be felt. And so this is reinforced by a quote from Dr. Russell Lowy-Hart, ACC's chancellor, who says that this evaluation reinforces what we know. When we provide real support, childcare, financial assistance, and a strong community, our students don't just persist, they thrive. And I feel like that is really the impact that we saw overall from the PSP in speaking with students and looking at the quantitative measures in this project. So I just want to close out my section by hitting these kind of 3 big highlights that were my key takeaways from the project. One is that 95% term-to-term retention for PSP participants. The other is that decrease in how many student loans they had to take out each semester. And third is that decreased time poverty from both the work flexibility from the stipend, but also as a result of that childcare support that allowed students to put more time dedicated to their studies instead. And so with that, I will pass it back to Becca and Angelica to talk about what came next.
Thanks, May. I always love, I know I've read the report multiple times, but it's always great to hear it recapped. I wanted to highlight a few additional learnings that we had that honestly just checked some assumptions or might have implications for anyone thinking about designing a similar program. We went into this program with the assumption that parenting students would want to move through school quickly and would favor taking on more credit hours over GPA. And we found out that that was not true for almost all of our students. GPA is important for getting other forms of financial support through scholarships. GPA was important for the students themselves. It was important for qualifying for other programs if they're moving through like a nursing track. So the credit hour requirement was helpful and it was also problematic, and it was something that we struggled with quite a bit. And so I just want to raise that was an assumption that we needed to check, and students would drop out of the program and forego that $500 a month because they wanted to keep good grades. So that was something it was just an assumption that we needed to check. And then the other two pieces are systemic, and also were good things for us to know about this population. I mean, some students were receiving other forms of assistance that had some kind of work requirement. And so again, that impacted the amount of credit hours that they were willing to take on because they were looking at overall household income. And luckily we had Angelica's team, and that's why the advocate support was so critical, because each advocate knew every single student's particular situation. And we tried to afford a lot of flexibility for students, depending on what their specific situation was. And then the last one, I think anybody who is working with parents knows that systemic childcare shortages are just a pervasive problem throughout our entire country. So even though we had childcare scholarships, the shortage of just availability of childcare is always a problem for parenting students. And it's something that needs to be resolved on a more systemic level. And May, if you go to the next slide, I'll talk about what's coming next. I mean, we were thrilled to be able to have some wonderful funders who allowed us to do this program over a period of 4 years and really grow and alter the program as we went. We did meet with students and paid them to provide more input every single year on the program design. We made tweaks throughout. And even though the program itself at ACC has ended, there are a lot of longer term impacts that I'm excited about. The first is that there is a program in East Contra Costa County, California, that's almost an exact replica of this program. They are piloting it with 3 community colleges in that county. They reached out to us for a lot of our program materials, and I'm just really eager to hear how that program, what the results are, how it grows, and it's really great to see that this is able to be replicated elsewhere. Angelica will talk more about this, but ACC is really investing in parenting students, and they've since hired a manager that will oversee parenting students programming and other pieces of things that we found out about parenting students through this journey. And then we've shared our outcomes and findings, and it was so wonderful to partner with Trellis and get this more really in-depth knowledge of what happened during this pilot. And we've tried to share it as far and wide as we can. And I'm going to toss it over to Angelica to talk more about what's going on with ACC in the long term.
So directly after we ended this program, ACC ventured into a complete realignment, and because of some of these programs and the outcomes of this program and some of the feedback from our parenting students, the basic needs system was created as a separate division from academics and student affairs at Austin Community College. In the basic needs system, it incorporates case management, financial support, food access, childcare, mental health counselors, and student accessibility services, which is like the accommodations and things like that, within that whole basic needs system. Obviously, parenting students are core to how the basic needs system has been set up. And so even when we developed what our recommendations for how ACC would progress and change, and all of these different services and supports would change. Parenting students were part of that conversation. So we actually had all of last year, 2 hourly parenting students who supported us and doing research, providing their feedback, and also just talking to other parenting students about how we were changing and moving our services for them and all ACC students. You can go to, I think, the third slide. One of the big things that came out of our changes was we now have Riverbat Bites food pantries at all of our campuses. So ACC has 11 different campuses, and all of them now have a food pantry. And the range of what is available at the food pantry is different in terms of food. So some of them just have shelf-stable food. Some of them have fresh foods, refrigeration, meats, all of everything really. But one thing that is available at all of the food pantries is baby products. So they all have diapers, wipes. They have baby formula, as well as hygiene and other items available to students. But because of our connection to parenting students and the importance of those students in our process of changes, baby products is available for all students. So just to give you an idea, every student at ACC can go to a food pantry at least once a week to pick up groceries. So that means every parent can go to pick up baby products, formula, all of those things at least once a week. Also incorporated within the basic needs system is our care network. So our care network includes our advocacy team. We also learned with our working with our parenting students that there is a real need for connection to mental health counselors. So our advocacy team and our mental health counseling team have now merged into one combined team. It's a lot of the time our parenting students start with an advocate because that's the person that has the direct fixes, the problem solving, all of that. And they are typically case managing all child care scholarship students. So that's another thing that came out of this work was we realized that connection to an advocate was really important to a student's success overall. So every student that receives a child care scholarship has an advocate that they work with. And then we've kind of refocused that, and now there's a manager of parenting student work who is going to be leading a lot of our event planning. So again, going back to understanding that our parenting students do want to feel more engaged with the college. They lack that connection and belonging feeling. We will be embarking on engaging those students in new and different ways. So like earlier this month, we had a study party at the library. So that meant that the students can bring their children. We had people helping to watch the children while the tutors can engage with the student and they can actually study. And there was like movies and all of that. So just trying to find creative ways for them to connect and for their families to connect as well, because we kind of heard that was really important to them as well. Let's see. In addition, of course, we have student emergency funds. When we think about our connections with community partners, we do use a lot of community partners within the Student Emergency Fund. We no longer just give a student emergency funding. We do have very short-term case management with all of our students who are receiving student emergency funds, just to kind of make sure that we are stabilizing them and truly fixing the long-term problem. You can go to the next slide. With our mental health counselors, we've also started engaging with a timely care. So every parenting student can access timely care. So it's not available to all students at Austin Community College, but it is available to all of our parenting students. So timely care is 24 hours a day, also realizing the time poverty, also realizing that access to mental health for parenting students is important, but they often lack it. So we they can engage with timely care at any hour of the day. Timely Care also has access to wellness programming, yoga, different things that can help them and their families in their mental health journeys. And then the last component of basic needs is accessibility and disability services. So again, our advocates are typically the entryway for a lot of our parenting students because they get to know them. They're signing up for childcare scholarships, and they are now connected with these other two very important resources, accommodations and mental health services, and can directly refer them and connect them with those resources on campus, which I think makes it easier. We find makes it easier for parenting students to connect without having to go to a bunch of different offices. It's all centrally located within the same office space. And the next one is just a slide that kind of shows all of our different services and who's eligible for those long term. We do have restrictions around grants and all of that as well. So we can't have not all of our services are accessible to every type of student. But in terms of the stipend program itself, we were not able to continue, but we did pull out pieces of it. Again, the connection and belonging, the connection to the advocate, the childcare scholarships continue. And then we also have some students who are receiving childcare scholarships, but also receiving like transportation vouchers. So again, not able to give them the $500 a month, but $100 a month for transportation costs. So we did pull out parts of this program that we could sustain long term and that we could sustain with larger amounts of students.
Thank you both so much for all of that. And I think, Allyson, with that, we're ready to go to questions.
Perfect. It's been so great to hear more about the Parenting Students Project. Thank you so much to Angelica and Becca and May for that really great overview. And then I think we have gotten a few questions in the Q&A feature. Anything else that y'all in the audience want to ask, go ahead and feel free to add that in there. But I think we can go ahead and get started with this anonymous attendees question about will ACC be able to sustain the stipend program without grant funding?
No, we will not be able to sustain the stipend program without grant funding. We've invested a lot in childcare scholarships, so we have increased the childcare scholarship amount that a student can get within a semester. And we have also added transportation vouchers as well as the food pantries across the district, but we will not be able to continue the $500 stipend.
That makes total sense. We also were answering some questions as they came in. I love to see it, but I also think it's great for those who might not have been paying attention to the question and answer feature, just kind of go over some of those questions. And thinking through the advocate position, someone asked, was the role intentionally designed to allow the advocate/advisor to combine responsibilities with working with these students? I think it'd be great for our attendees to know.
Yeah, so the advocate position actually existed before we engaged in this program, and it was always designed as a advisor and advocate role. So they with every student that they were case managing, they were also the advisor on record.
And then thinking through another question for ACC, will ACC continue to document the success rates of parenting students for the changes now in place, and who has this responsibility?
Yes, ACC does continue, and we've actually really increased our work on data and our parenting students. It's actually gotten a lot easier since we're in the state of Texas and we're required to report how many parenting students we have. It's actually gotten a lot easier for us to connect with those parenting students, but also to report data-wise how those parenting students are doing and have done. So I can tell you that in this past academic year in FY25, parenting students that received childcare scholarships were 82% more likely to fall to fall retention. So they were a retention rate of 82%, whereas parenting students who did not receive childcare scholarships were at a 55%. So there is definitely a large difference between those students who are receiving this childcare scholarships and the case management from those who are not accessing those. So we do continue to expand our work on our data for all basic needs, but that also includes parenting students. And our OIRA, which is our institutional and analytics group, it does have one committed person to basic needs.
Wow, that's excellent. I love to hear that as a basic needs data nerd. I also think we're getting some questions, lots of questions for ACC. I love to see it. 2 questions came in asking about the advisor/advocate student ratio. How many students did each advisor see, and how many advisors/advocates were there in the program?
So there are 12 advocates currently working at ACC. So it's 12 advocates over 11 campuses. We have about, 7,000 parenting students in the district. About 200 to 250 a semester are receiving childcare scholarships. So not a lot are having to do the long-term case management. But we're also the parenting student liaison on record for the state of Texas. So again, another requirement by the state. So that means that any parenting student that needs support, academic support, personal support, any of those things, can see their advocate for those things. So we do have 12, but in terms of who's actually getting long-term case management, is typically more like 30 to 50. Again, that's not the only role of the advocate, though. I should say they are also in charge of working with students who are trying to access the emergency fund. So there's a lot of work in that. So they have multiple roles within the college, but in terms of their caseload for parenting students, it's around like 30 to 50.
Great. And then someone asked if this webinar is going to be available as a video, if they just want to share it with others in their institution. And yes, we are recording. And probably sometime next week, we'll send out a link to the recording along with the slide deck for all attendees and registrants. Okay, and another question here, is that $500 stipend treated as countable income for federal financial aid calculations and public benefits eligibility, or both?
I can take that one, unless you want to jump in on that, but it was not. So through United Way, because of the income level of the students, we were able to count it as charitable class donations from United Way. And so it was therefore not included in tax documents. And Angelica, if you want to add anything, please do.
In terms of financial aid, we did have to report it to financial aid, how much each student was receiving. But they worked with us on expanding the cost of attendance for those parenting students. So we typically had to just answer the student typically had to answer a few more questions around their cost of living so they would increase their cost of attendance. We had no student that was impacted, whose financial aid package was impacted by the funds that they received.
Perfect. See. All right. Questions just keep coming in. I love it. Okay. Has ACC committed to fully funding the program/services? Are you continuing to apply for grants or have any recommendations for funding sources for similar efforts?
I can take the first part. ACC, so as I said, ACC did not continue the $500 stipend program. And we do engage in grant writing for all of the other supports and programs that we are pulling out of that project to continue. So ACC has committed institutional funds to childcare scholarships to continue those. We also have grants that support that so that we can have a larger amount of students who are receiving those childcare scholarships. The the pantries are all, and the diapers, wipes, all of that are largely provided by, are provided through institutional funds. We do have small grants that support that as well, but the institution itself has largely supported the ongoing access to those things. And yeah, in terms of recommendations for funding sources, I'll let Becca, since she was the one who worked with on that.
Yeah, so the funding for this pilot came from and some others, but we had two very generous multi-year grants from major funders. One was the Advance Together initiative that was run out of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. And the other was the Expanding Opportunities for Young Families initiative out of the NEEKC Foundation. And so we were really lucky to secure these like 3 and 5 year multi-year grants to be able to support this program. Guaranteed income programs, and this isn't a classic guaranteed income program because it does have conditions tied to it, but the model is similar to a guaranteed income program. They're very expensive, and it's actually unusual for a guaranteed income program to run longer than a year or 18 months at the most. They're still very exploratory programs, and I think we're learning a lot from them. There's a lot of traction gaining around guaranteed income with other United Ways around the country and other organizations. But where they stand right now is that they're pilots. We test things. We learn a lot about this population. We can make an evidence-based argument. Again, thanks to Trellis for adding so much weight behind that. So we can bring in some higher, maybe more systemic levels of funding because these types of programs are expensive.
I know that we've been doing rapid fire questions here. So we can go ahead and maybe just try to start closing with maybe 1 or 2 more questions that I have that I would love to see this group answer. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and I think especially for parenting students who are already juggling so much, there might be even additional stressors that we might not have seen when we are doing the evaluation. And I would just really like to see from this group, what additional supports would the 3 of you like to see for parenting students in the future?
I can jump in first just to say briefly, kind of from the perspective specifically through these interviews that I did, the most resounding thing was with regards to childcare. We all know this is a resource that parenting students need, and I think the flexibility of childcare is the point that I'd really hammer home. Which is that, every student needs something slightly different. There's a lot of good research out there about also the quality of childcare that people are able to access, right? And the standards that parents have for the quality of the childcare that they're sending their kid to. And that's a really big, gnarly problem, right? Like sorting out the possible funding streams, childcare that's close to campus, availability of childcare with workforce demand challenges as well. But I think the thing that's really so powerful about the Parenting Students Program and the support that's still offered at ACC that I saw was the kind of direct engagement with students and the resource connection to childcare opportunities. So, as the attendees all acknowledged in their questions, the kind of importance of these student advocates, of that role as a one-on-one guidance for students to go through the different resources that they might be able to access. I think it was helpful for students in the PSP for kind of troubleshooting childcare challenges as they fluctuated throughout the semester. And so that's the kind of support system that I kind of most encourage people towards coming out of the research that we did.
Thank you. Becca, then Angelica. I think we might have one more question after that.
I mean, I think what comes to mind is that so much of this pilot, like to your point, May, these things we still don't fully have. And so there is the systemic piece around childcare. There's a lot in here around modeling. I think it takes so long for a student to go through this whole process. And I'm not sure, like, even just having some shared awareness around how long it takes a student, especially a parenting student, to persist. And maybe my brain's just on the next, the work that our United Way is doing right now, which is around the benefits cliff. But there's so much wonderful resources when someone is a student, and then when we move them into the next step of their career and their lives, there's a pretty significant cliff in terms of support. And so I think continuing to think about what students will need after and how to make the continuity of support last a little bit longer would really help. And then I'll pass it to Angelica.
There's a few things that kind of come to mind. Childcare was definitely one of them. It's definitely something that ACC is exploring, other childcare options. We're looking at Head Start options for the campuses, as well as drop-in care for some of the campuses as well. With an 11 campus district, and we're in several different counties, it's very difficult for us to kind of get our hands around that, but it's something that we're exploring for future, like 2 to 3 years out. I think another thing is around the connection and belonging. So trying to find ways to engage these students and make them feel a part of the college is really important to us. We know that 28% of our student population are parenting students. And so being able to tell that story and to get them together so that they can connect and they can have meaningful relationships at the college. And I think obviously, money's like they're at the root of a lot of things for parenting students, how much time they have with their children, how much they can go to school. It's all kind of revolves around money. And so I think without a program like this, like looking at other options, I know our financial aid department was able to prioritize parenting students for like work study jobs. So we have a lot of parenting students that now have work study jobs. And that I think trying to find small ways like that to impact that money issue that they all encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are all really great responses to that question. And we did get one last question, and I think this is particularly salient given the government shutdown that we are currently experiencing. But someone wrote in, these types of programs can be expensive for an institution. Have you identified any federal funding that can help to mitigate costs?
My short answer is no, to be completely direct. There are some interesting, and I wish I knew the city of Austin has run a guaranteed income program for city residents that's publicly funded, at least. And there's a lot of interest. Some states are doing some interesting work with TANF and being able to do direct cash or emergency fund payments with TANF. But for guaranteed income, I personally have not seen anything that's been leveraging federal funding. I think it's mostly been philanthropic.
Yeah, that's my sense as well. Anything May or Angelica want to add there?
No, I think I would just echo that. I think the thing I've heard most about is trying to leverage those public service funds where they do exist from the federal government or states like TANF, other sorts of resources to try and funnel those appropriately, but which is more of like a policy advocacy perspective than something institutions can do directly, but where institutions can work with their states to help make those funds more accessible. I think that's one of the most promising strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone at North Central Michigan College in Northern Michigan said that they run a very similar program supporting students, and they use the wonderful C-Campus federal funding for a lot of the support, including the cost of the advisor and advocate position. I do believe that C-Campus, the future of C-Campus is kind of in the balance right now, as well as work studies. So I do think, continuing to look outside of the federal sources of funding for these types of initiatives is something that we will need to do in the future. But I think with that, we can kind of wrap up for today. And I just wanted to thank Becca and Angelica for joining us. We really appreciate it and just appreciate being able to share about the success stories of this wonderful program. And just wanted to do kind of a last call if anyone has anything else that they would like to add before we wrap up. Okay.
Not for me, just thank you all for having us and for spotlighting and studying this work. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And you can be expecting the recording and slides sometime in the next week. Thanks so much.